Welcome to another interesting session of the Analyst. In today's video, we are going to discuss 5 important topics from the perspective of the UPSC examination. The topics are as follows. First of all, we will inquire about the issues surrounding the UAPA Act. Then, we will examine the provisions of Wildlife Protection Act and also read about the associated issue of human-animal conflict. Then we will study about the viability of one nation, one election in our country, followed by a new satellite launched by ISRO, that is INSAT 3DS. Towards the end, we will read about a species called as horseshoe crab. So let's begin. Now, why Unlawful Activity Prevention Act or UAPA has been in the news? The reason being that as per a recent report which showcased that more than 5,000 cases of sedition were filed between 2018 to 2022 under UAPA, which shows gross violation of human rights under the provisions of UAPA or Unlawful Activity Prevention Act, which forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the theme of government policies and interventions. So before we inquire about various issues which surround UAPA, let's first try to understand what is UAPA. Well, the UAPA came into force in the year 1967. What was the backdrop for the government to enforce such a stringent law? The reason being that in 1960s there was demand of secession from the Union by various groups on religious as well as linguistic lines. Also, there was a militant uprising in the region of Naxalbari in Bengal, where the people aimed to throw the state machinery by the use of violent methods. This imparted an emergency in the government and it resorted to framing the laws of UAPA for more effective prevention of unlawful activities of individuals as well as associations. Now, under the Act, unlawful activity is described as any action taken to disrupt the territorial integrity, the sovereignty as well as the security of the nation. Now keep this in mind that here the term security has a broader meaning because it comprises of food security, energy security, environment security as well as fiscal and monetary security. Also, the Act aims to prevent the use of funds for terrorist activities through money laundering or hawala channels. Now let's look at the provisions of UAPA. Well, the Act provides absolute power to the central government which can declare any activity as unlawful however it deems fit so. Also, the Act is applicable to both Indians as well as foreign nationals. Now, if you are an Indian and you have committed any activity which is detrimental to the security of the nation and that act has been committed by you in a foreign nation, even then the provisions of the UAPA will be applicable on you. Also, there are two provisions under UAPA which makes it different from ordinary criminal laws. What are they? Under UAPA, the NIA or the National Investigation Agency can file a charge sheet in maximum of 180 days after the arrest. Under the normal laws, in normal cases, that period is provided only of 90 days, which means that the agency can arrest you today and it can take up to 180 days where you will be detained and put under thorough investigation and inquiry, and the NIA has the authority to file the charge sheet after 180 days or 6 months. Also, the remand order under UAPA extends to 30 days, while in normal cases it is only of 15 days. Now keep this in mind that NIA is a statutory body which was created by the NIA Act 2008 in the wake of 26/11 terror attacks. Also, under the UAPA Act, the maximum penalty is of death or life imprisonment. Now let's see that what are the amendments which has been introduced to the Unlawful Activity Prevention Act to keep it responsive to the various emerging challenges. The first such amendment was in the year 2004, which stated that even a terrorist act can be used to ban an organization and included the terrorist act into the list of offenses, which means that if you are an organization and you participate in any kind of activity which comprises our security, then you will be banned or not allowed to do any activity on our Indian soil. Under this provision, various organizations has been banned so far. For example, Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed and Khalistan Zindabad Force, etc. Also, the amendment provided for a tribunal to confirm this ban within the period of 6 months. And under the 2004 Amendment Act, such ban was extended for 2 years. Thus, after 2 years, a review of your working will be taken place and it will be decided that the ban will continue or not. But under the 2013 amendment, this ban was extended further up to 5 years. Also, the amendment provided several changes such as including the provision of money laundering under the terrorist activity to keep it in the requirement of FATF or Financial Action Task Force, of which India is a signatory. Now let's see another important amendment which took place in the year 2019, which provided that not only an organization but an individual can also be designated as a terrorist. It empowers the government to designate individuals as terrorists. Also, it further extended the power of National Investigation Agency, where the Director General of NIA can now grant approval of seizure or attachment of property of the accused person. Also, before the 2019 Amendment Act, any such investigation related to a terrorist activity was supposed to be done by an officer of rank DSP or ACP. But now, under the 2019 amendment, such investigation can also be done by an inspector or someone who is above the inspector rank. Now let's see what are the criticism of UAPA. The first and foremost is the low conviction rate. The low conviction rate takes place because of the preemptive arrest and detention, where the arrest can be done by an investigating agency only based on the suspicion or anticipation of any potential offenses. Right? What does this imply? It means that even though a crime has not yet committed by you, but the investigating agency deems fit that you are going to commit a potential crime in the future, which will fall under the category of a terrorist activity, then also you can be detained. This provision leads to the low conviction rate, which means that a lot of people are being detained or being accused without any significant charges. For example, between 2018 to 2022, out of 4,690 people who were arrested or were made accused, only 149 were convicted, which means the conviction rate stands as low as 3%. Also, this happens because of the ambiguity in the law. Why? Because of the vague definition of terms such as terrorism and security, etc. Let's take an example here. Let's say that you have become a political activist and you are raising concerns about some government scheme. But because the elections are round the corner, the government does not want any bad publicity. So the government puts a charge on you of committing a terrorist activity by inciting enmity between people and keep you behind the bars for 180 days under the provisions of UAPA. Thus, because the terms are not defined, it leaves the central government with vast powers to arrest or detain anyone, and in the case of no checks and balances, it can also lead to uncontrollable power, thus leading to human right violations. Why? Because you were a political activist, you were raising your voice. Are not these rights protected under the fundamental right of Article 19, which provides you fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression? Also, when you are put behind the bars for 6 months for something which you have not done, does not it violate your Article 21 or your right to dignified life? This exactly happened with G. Chakrabarti, who was arrested under UAPA and put behind the bars for 7 years, and finally he was acquitted of all the charges, leading to gross case of violation of human rights. Also, the provisions of UAPA act as antithetical to the ordinary criminal law because it has a higher bar for providing the bail. Because in normal circumstances, there is a general principle of law accepted widely that an accused is innocent until proven guilty. So was held in the case Balchan case of 1978, which we'll come to a bit later. First, let's see what are the debates which surrounds the bail provision, and to understand that, let's say how the bar for the bail under UAPA has been set. So, under the section 43D of UAPA Act, it states that no person accused, keep this in mind, accused, not convicted, of an offence under Chapter 4 and Chapter 6 of this Act in custody shall be released on bail unless and until the public prosecutor has argued on application of such release. Who is public prosecutor here? Public prosecutor is basically a legal representative of the state. So, unless and until the public prosecutor has examined your bail provisions or has examined the charges which you are denying against you, till then you cannot be provided the bail. Also, the section 173 of CRPC or Criminal Procedure Code lays down that if the court is of the opinion that there are reasonable ground for believing that the accusations are prima facie true, which means on the surface level true, then the bail shall not be granted, which means that the court has been provided as a position of arbitrator to decide the validity of the bail which you are seeking. So let's say you are an accused under UAPA and you are asking for the bail, thus the court will sit as a decider to see that whether the charges against you hold some ground or not. This was held in the landmark judgment of Balchan case 1978, where the Supreme Court held that bail is the rule and the jail is exception. So if you are arrested under UAPA, the court will try to provide you bail unless and until there are some significant evidences which prove otherwise that you were involved in a terrorist activity. This was further enlarged in Vatali versus NIA case of 2019, where the court held that the court shall not examine the evidences but only accepts it as a face value. So even if the accused are providing some minuscule level of evidences, the court will accept it and will provide bail immediately, thus providing for speedy bail process. But from the year 2021, we see a divergent trend in provisions of the bail under UAPA. For example, in K. Najib case 2021, the Supreme Court held that bail under UAPA is exception but shall be balanced by speedy trial. So now the table was reversed. In Balchand case, it was held that the bail is the rule, jail is exception. But in K. Najib case, Supreme Court held that bail is the rule, jail is the exception. Now keep this in mind that under normal circumstances, as we discussed already, that the widely accepted principle is that an accused is innocent unless proven guilty. But if you are charged under UAPA, the accused is guilty until proven innocent. Thus, the bar for the bail has been set really high, which ultimately leads to the violation of human rights. Also, further, in the V. Gonzalez case of 2023, the Supreme Court held that the surface analysis of probative value of evidences is necessary, which means that whatever the evidences an accused is providing, there should be an analysis of that and it should not be taken prima facie as it was held in Vatali case. Now, in a very recent ruling of Gurvinder Singh case 2024, which deals where the accused is dealt with some association with Khalistan, the Supreme Court held that the bail is the exception and the jail is rule under UAPA, thus further stringing the provisions of bail under UAPA. Now, amidst this criticism, we have to keep one thing in mind, that the security of the nation is paramount. At the same time, there are rising concerns of terrorism, also state-sponsored terrorism, to hinder the growth of India. Thus, a balanced approach or a Madhya Marg of Buddha shall be taken, where the UAPA shall be enforced, but it shall also be equally balanced by speedy trial, strengthening the anti-terror agencies such as NIA to make sure faster and advocate investigation, and also to ensure the fundamental rights of our citizen. With these suggestions, we move forward to our next news, which deals with Wildlife Protection Act. Now, the Wildlife Protection Act has been in the news because recently the Kerala Assembly adopted a resolution where it asked the central government to amend the Wildlife Protection Act to provide better provisions to deal with human-animal conflict. Now, this forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of biodiversity and environment. So before we go and inquire about the issue of animal-human conflict, let's first read in detail about the provisions of Wildlife Protection Act, under which there are various schedules, and it provides for a legal framework where various measures and protections has been provided for species of wild animals and plants. It also laid down certain rules for the management of the habitats of these flora and fauna, such as national park and wildlife sanctuaries. Also, it lays down for the regulation and control of trade in plants and animals and the products which are made from them. So let's see what are various schedules under Wildlife Protection Act, where plants and animals has been categorized according to the different status of protection accorded to them. First and foremost is the Schedule 1, where the endangered species has been kept, which requires ultimate and large degree of protection. Also, for such animals, the hunting is prohibited throughout the India as well as their trade is prohibited. Also, it provides them with the highest penalty if someone commits into any kind of trade in relation to these animals or deals with their hunting. Also, the animals which has been kept under these are tiger, cheetah, Indian gazelle, black buck, brow antler deer as well as blue whale. Now, there is a small distinction between Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 animals. The Schedule 2 deals with the animals which are currently threatened and thus needs to be protected. Now, these are the animals who, if not provided with enough protection, will ultimately become endangered. Thus, even for the animals kept in Schedule 2, the prohibition is applied for their hunting or any kind of trade. Also, the highest penalty is provided under the Schedule 1 and strict penalties are provided under the Schedule 2. Now, the animals which are kept in the Schedule 2 are Assamese macaque, Bengal langur, Indian fox and the flying squirrel which is found in the Namdapha National Park of Arunachal Pradesh. Now, there are several other schedules which are important, such as Schedule 3 and Schedule 4. Now, here those animals are kept which are not endangered, but at the same time they are protected species and their hunting is prohibited. Now, we will see category wise the animals which are kept in Schedule 3 such as cheetal, bharal and sambhar deer, where the bharal is the blue sheep found in the region of high plateaus such as Ladakh. Also, the Schedule 4 animals such as flamingo, kingfisher and horseshoe crab. Now, keep horseshoe crab in mind because we will come to this animal or species a bit later. Then there is Schedule 5. Now, Schedule 5 deals with the vermins. Who are vermins? Vermins are basically the small wild animals that carry some kind of disease or they are leading to the destruction of food crops. Also, these animals can be hunted because they are proving detrimental to the larger society and environment. Now, currently there are 4 animals which forms part of Schedule 5, which are common crow, fruit bat, rat and mice. Then there is Schedule 6 which deals with the protection and regulation of specified plants. Now, keep this thing which we are going to read next in your mind, that is that cultivation and trade of these Schedule 6 plants can be carried out by permission of competent authorities, which means some kind of licensing is required for the plants which are listed in the Schedule 6 by competent authorities for their cultivation and their trade. Now, the plants which are kept in the Schedule 6 are blue and red orchids, sleeper orchids, kut, pitcher plant and kikad. Now, with this information, let's try to solve a question which appeared in the prelims 2020. It asks that if a particular plant species is placed under the Schedule 6 of Wildlife Protection Act 1972, what is the implication? Now, the first statement itself says that a license is required to cultivate that plant. As we have seen that cultivation and trade can be carried out by the permission of competent authorities through a licensing system. Thus, the option A is the correct answer. Let's move forward to the bodies which has been created under the Act of 1972. There are 4 important bodies. First is the National Board for Wildlife, which is chaired by the Prime Minister, and its state level authority, that is the State Board for Wildlife, which is chaired by the Chief Minister of the respective state. Then there is National Tiger Conservation Authority, which was created in the year 2005, and it is chaired by the Minister of Environment. And the Central Zoo Authority, which is also chaired by the Minister of Environment or the Chief Secretary to the Environment Ministry. Now, there are certain amendments which has been made by Wildlife Protection Act 2022 to the original act. The reason was to bring the conformity between Indian Wildlife Protection Act to the CITES, which stands for Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna, under which 4 schedules has been identified. The first schedule deals with the animal species which has the highest level of protection. Then there is a schedule 2 which deals with animal species with the lesser level of protection. The schedule 3 deals with the protected plant species, and ultimately the schedule 4 deals with the specimen which is protected under the provisions of CITES. So as we can see that the provisions has been made simpler in comparison to WPA 1972. Also, one may be wondering that why we needed to conform our provisions with CITES. So let's first inquire what is CITES. CITES, or Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna, is an international agreement to ensure international trade in animals and plants. Now this was drafted by IUCN in the year 1963. IUCN stands for International Union for Conservation of Nature, which was created in the year 1948 by various governmental organizations as well as civil society organizations for the ultimate aim of protection of nature. Now here keep this in mind that IUCN is not an organ of United Nations, but it acts as an observer to various environment initiatives of the United Nations, such as one being UNEP. Now the CITES came into force in the year 1975 and India became an official signatory in the year 1976. The Secretariat of CITES is administered by UNEP or United Nations Environment Program and is located at Geneva, Switzerland. Now keep this line very importantly in your mind that CITES is legally binding but not self-executing. What does this mean? This means that if India has become a signatory to the CITES, we should conform our provisions on the line of the provisions of the CITES. At the same time, the CITES will not replace the domestic laws which exist in our country for the protection of wildlife. Correctly? So, in our country, we will keep on regulating the wildlife through our own laws, but at the same time, we will confirm it with the international laws and rules. Now, with this information, let's try to solve another question of prelims which appeared in the year 2015. Which states that with reference to the International Union for Conservation of Nature and the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora CITES, which of the following statement is correct? Let's read the first statement carefully. The statement says that IUCN is an organ of United Nations and CITES is an international agreement between governments. So, we know that the first statement is incorrect. The second says that IUCN runs thousands of field projects around the world for better management of natural environment. Can be possible. And the third says that CITES is a legally binding on states that have joined it like India, but this convention does not take the place of national laws because we have a national law such as Wildlife Protection Act 2022. So the third statement is correct. With this, we can reach to the answer, that is 2 and 3 only. Now, keep this in mind that we needed to amend WPA 2022 to confirm with sites because India was trying to reintroduce cheetah from the regions of Namibia and South Africa, for which we needed to confirm with the rules and regulations set by sites, because any export or import or introduction of any new species is regulated through CITES mechanism by a management authority, for which the country which is a signatory of CITES shall also create its own management authority, which has been done by India under WPA 2022, where we have created a central management authority for regulation of wildlife in our country. Now let's inquire the issue of animal-wildlife conflict. What are the reasons why this issue has become such a major concern? Well, as per a recent data by the Ministry of Environment, between 2019 to 2022, there were more than 60 plus poaching cases of tiger. At the same time, between 2022 to 2023, more than 1600 people were killed by elephants. As we can see that these numbers are rising daily basis. Thus, the reason for such rising issue of conflict is urbanization and population burden. We know that as per the UNFPA report, India has become the most populous country in the world. At the same time, we are also the 5th largest economy. Thus, there is huge requirement for urbanization and various development activities, because of which, let's say there are two places, two economic regions, and we need to create a faster mode of transportation between them. Thus, many a times such highway or railway lines is laid between the forests, thus asking for human-animal conflict. Also, all this leads to their habitat loss, and thus these animals have to move towards the region of the city. This can also be seen in a funny image which highlights the problem which we are discussing of the habitat loss. Also, there is habitat degradation due to the growth of invasive alien species. If we talk in the terms of flora, that can be Lantana camara, an invasive plant species, or if we talk in the case of fauna, it can be as simple as a street dog. Now, let's take an example that because of the increasing population of street dogs, they are facing the shortage of food in the urban region. So, they start moving towards the forest areas where they are feeding on small prey, which will ultimately lead to food shortage for big predators such as tiger, lion, and thus bringing them to the periphery of the forest where such conflicts become much more prone. Also, there is changing cropping pattern, right? At the same time, there is unregulated growth of wild animals. Now, this is the issue which is a major concern for Kerala, because under WPA 2022, only central government can declare an animal as vermin. Thus, state government does not have any such power. So, if an animal becomes rogue or start destroying the crops, the state government does not have the option to cull or kill that animal, because it will stand as a violation to the WPA 2022. Also, there are illegal collection of forest produce, because of which the humans are moving towards the regions of animals such as forest. Now, all this can be controlled, can be regulated through some suggestions which act as a way forward, where we shall strive to empower our Gram Panchayats under Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 to provide them the authority to deal with such turbulent animals. At the same time, the right to declare vermin shall be passed on to the state government under the WPA 2022. Also, there should be crop insurance provided under Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, so that these farmers, they do not engage with the herd of elephants and minimize the animal-human conflict. Also, we should augment the fodder and water resources within the forest areas to make sure that there is less migration of animals to the human populated regions. Also, we need to sensitize the masses, for example, by giving them Amrita Devi Bishnoi Award, which is given for wildlife protection, and thus create a harmonious relation between animals and humans to make sure that there is a sustainable development which takes place and such conflicts and losses are avoided and minimized. With this suggestion, we move forward to our next news. Now, why one nation, one election has been in the news? The reason being that various states and very recently Tamil Nadu has opposed the proposal of one nation, one election, which stands for conducting legislative assembly election for all the states and the general election for Lok Sabha simultaneously. Well, this forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the theme of central-state relation and dealing with the value of federalism. So, let's first see why there is demand for one nation, one election in our country. Well, according to the Election Commission of India, the Indian nation has turned into a polity which is perennially or continuously in the election. For example, between 23 to 2024, there will be 14 legislative assembly election and one Lok Sabha election which will take place. At the same time, this will lead to the disruption of regular administrative and development work. How? Well, to conduct these elections, a lot of officials such as police officials, school teachers, district magistrates will be deployed for these election duties. At the same time, it will hamper the development because of the enforcement of Model Code of Conduct by the Election Commission of India, under which no new policy or scheme can be initiated by the government. Also, because of the perennial elections going on, the politicians, they remain in populist mode instead of being in the policy making mode, where they keep on launching new schemes and taking new initiatives to gain the vote from the public. For example, whenever the election comes, we hear about a lot of freebies or farm loan waivers. At the same time, these politicians, they resort to showmanship instead of statesmanship, where they try to gain the vote of the public by making unregulated and unchecked claims and taking measures which does not have any long-term policy making solutions. They just try to make short gains for their own benefits. At the same time, it leads to the greater scope of corruption because of the existence a lot of lobbies such as trader lobbies or farmer lobbies, which knows that if the election is coming, they can pressurize the government to accept their demands. At the same time, because of these elections taking place at regular intervals, it can lead to the inflow of black money into our country, which is unaccounted and unsolicited, ultimately leading to the issue of money laundering. Also, such elections lead to the polarization of society because these politicians, they resort to making hate speeches or dividing the community on religion and caste lines to gain the vote. And as per Vinoba Bhave said that in India, the people do not cast their vote, they vote their caste, which ultimately hinders the unity of the nation as envisaged under the fundamental duty. Thus, the Niti Aayog has suggested for the implementation of one nation, one election, where the elections of all legislative assembly and the election of Lok Sabha will take place simultaneously, let's say from 16th of February to 20th of February, thus making sure that there will be continuity of the government for the next 5 years. For this suggestion, Niti Aayog has suggested that there will be several benefits or advantages. For example, it will lead to continuity in governance because whichever the government will come into power will know that it is going to last there for the next 5 years, and thus it will not resort to make any populist claims or rather envisage to deal with long-term policy making. At the same time, it will also lead to long-term policies, and thus where we can have like strong changes in our society, such as reformation of power discoms which are facing huge financial losses rather than providing for free electricity. Also, it can lead to the creation of more dedicated cadre of public officials. Because we have often seen that when a new political party comes into the power, they start deploying the officials which are dear to them. Now, this frequent transfer of the officers can lead to the disruption of administration. Thus, that can be checked as well. Also, it will lead to reduction in the expenditure during the election period. For example, as per the Center of Policy Research, more than 6,500 crore was spent by 16 political parties during 2015 to 2020 in various elections which took place. 6,500 crore rupees. Also, this will lead to curb the divisive politics which often takes place, as we saw, in the form of hate speeches or trying to gain the vote of a particular caste or community. Also, it will further improve the center and state relation because they will not keep on fighting among themselves to gain advantage in the election which is going to take place. But at the same time, several political theorists have raised a lot of concerns related to one nation, one election. What are the concerns? Well, first of all, there are a lot of constitutional challenges which will have to overcome to implement one nation, one election. For example, there is a requirement of amendment to Representation of People Act 1951, as well as amendment to the Article 172, which deals with the tenure of the Legislative Assembly and Legislative Council in the state. Thus, to do such amendments, we will also need the approval of various states, and this can create further center and state tussle. Also, it can undermine the value of federalism because let's say there is a central government and it is going to implement one nation, one election. Now, let's say there is a state A where the election is due in 2024. And then there is another state where the government has just formed in the year of 2024 and will be ruling till 2029. But if we want to conduct one nation, one election in the year 2025, then for state A, the tenure of Legislative Assembly will have to be extended by 1 year. But for the state B, the remaining 4 years of its governance will be curtailed out and it will be limited to only 1 year of government. All this will create a lot of issues and thus a lot of political consensus will be required. At the same time, it will violate the periodic accountability principle of democracy, where the people show their liking or disliking towards the government through periodic elections which takes place. For example, let's say there is a party A which forms the central government, but they take certain measures which were not liked by the people. Now this party A is contesting election in a state legislative assembly, and the people will not vote for this central government, showing the government that we are not in the resonance with your policies. Thus, there is a periodic accountability which has been created through such mechanism, and that can be disturbed by one nation, one election. Also, it will be very difficult for the masses to understand this complex process, that when they are going to vote on day 1, which election is taking place for center, which election is taking place for state, which party is a national party, which party is a state party. All this can confuse the voter and ultimately lead to a single party dominance or bias towards a national party, because the national party is the one which is currently in the rule and thus has more visibility to the people. At the same time, a national party has much more funds and resources. Thus, it can have much more publicity of its work among the public. All this can lead to a single party dominance which forms the government in the central government. Thus, all these issues has to be addressed, and there is a larger political consensus which is required for such electoral reforms to be implemented. With this suggestion, we move forward to the fourth news of the day, which is the launch of a satellite called as INSAT 3DS. Recently, the ISRO has published that it is going to launch a meteorological satellite INSAT 3DS from Sriharikota on 17th of February. Now this forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of science and technology and also holds prominence for your prelims paper. Let's first inquire the specifications of the satellite. Well, INSAT stands for Indian Satellite System. And this satellite is going to be launched on GSLV or Geostationary Launch Vehicle F-14. Now, this satellite is a user-funded project with collaboration with the Ministry of Earth and Science. Also, the lift-off mass of this satellite is 2275 kg. Now, this satellite is the continuation to the third generation meteorological satellite series from the geostationary orbit following the launch of earlier two satellites, which were INSAT 3D, INSAT 3DR, and this INSAT 3DR was launched in the year 2016 and is still functional in the orbit. Now let's see what are the objectives which we are aiming to achieve from the launch of this satellite. Well, the satellite has two important payloads. The first is Data Relay Transponder or DRT, through which the data, various kinds of data such as hydrological data, meteorological data, as well as oceanographic data will be collected by AWS or Advanced Weather Systems, and all those data will be sent back to the satellite, which will ultimately help it to improve its capability to predict various kind of weather changes. At the same time, it has a satellite-aided search and rescue transponder, which can be used for an immediate rescue mission by creating a distress signal. For example, we all might have heard about a recent case of Titanic submarine which sank in the Atlantic Ocean. So in that case, this satellite will create a distress signal and will inform the authorities on immediate basis, and thus a rescue operation can be launched. Also, it will enable the development of newer satellite product which can have better predictability of cyclones, the monsoon and the thunderstorms, etc. Now, India has a vast coastline of more than 7,500 km, and we are repeatedly impacted by various cyclones, especially on our eastern coast. Thus, this satellite will help us to mitigate the impact of such cyclones. At the same time, we are very well aware the importance of monsoon for our agricultural sector. Thus, we can better predict the monsoon, and according to that, we can have preparedness for our crop production. At the same time, it can also save us from various kinds of thunderstorms. Then, it will help us in the observation of atmosphere, land as well as oceans. Now, with this discussion, there is a growing realization that this satellite is going to be very important for our economic growth as well as to ensure our uniform growth in the future. But at the same time, we had read about a term which was GSLV, that is Geostationary Launch Vehicle. So let's quickly inquire what is a geostationary orbit. Well, a geostationary orbit is where the satellite circles the Earth right above the equator from west to east. Correct? Now, the Earth revolves around the Sun from west to east. The satellite revolves around the Earth right above the equator from west to east, as you can see in the image. Thus, it will complete a rotation in exactly the same time which it takes Earth to complete a rotation on its orbit, that is 23 hours, 56 minutes and 4 seconds, where this satellite will be moving with a speed of 3 km per second at an altitude of 35,786 kilometers, with which there will be an antenna on Earth which will be fixed directly, and it will be stay pointing towards the satellite without moving. Thus, it provides the observation of one particular area for a long period of time and helps us in establishing telecommunication links as well as to monitor the weather. Now, because these satellites are placed at such high height of 35,786 kilometers, it requires a very small number of satellites to cover large areas of Earth. Thus, it covers large ranges of Earth, and normally 3 to 4 satellites are enough to cover the whole area of Earth. This is the advantage of geostationary satellite, one of which is being launched by ISRO, the name of which is INSAT 3D. Now, with this information, we move forward to our last news of the day, which talks about a species in the news named as Horseshoe Crab. Now, the horseshoe crab has been in the news, the reason being that various environmental groups has petitioned the US government to seek endangered species protection for American horseshoe crab, which is also known as a living fossil. Now, this forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the climate change and its impact, and is also very important from the perspective of the prelims under the theme of flora and fauna. So, let's first inquire what is horseshoe crab and what are its specifications. Well, horseshoe crab is called as a marine living fossil. The reason being that since the evolution of species, the horseshoe crab has not changed drastically and shows the reminiscence of the original species, which has evolution 450 million years ago. At the same time, these horseshoe crabs are not classified as true crabs but as arthropods. The reason being that in true crabs have antenna in the front of their face and they have 5 pairs of legs, while a horseshoe crab lacks antenna and has 7 pairs of legs. At the same time, the horseshoe crab has kind of appendages near its mouth which are called as chelicerae. And horseshoe crabs uses this chelicerae for picking up the food and eating it. At the same time, this spine-tailed creature lives in the shallow coastal water on the intertidal beaches. Now, it serves 2 important ecological functions. What are they? Well, first is that it forms an important part of food chain because horseshoe crab lays down millions of eggs on the coastal regions which serve as food for fish and various other wildlife. At the same time, it also serves as microhabitat where the horseshoe crabs dwells at the bottom of the sea, where a lot of animals such as mollusk, oyster, sponges, snails, all that come and take shelter in the shell of the horseshoe crab. Thus, we can see that horseshoe crab has a very important ecological function. And if due to some reason, if its population is going to dwindle, it will have severe impact on the ecology of the region. Let's see what is the status and specification of horseshoe crab a bit further by discussing the extent of the horseshoe crab. Well, there are 4 extant species of horseshoe crab. One such is American horseshoe crab, which has been in the news, and that is found in the region of the eastern coast of USA and the Gulf of Mexico. Also, there are 3 Indo-Pacific species such as tri-spine, coastal and mangrove horseshoe crab species which are found in the region of India, Southeast Asia, China and Japan. In India, it is majorly found in the region of the eastern coast of our country from Southeast Asia to Japan and China. This is the extent of horseshoe crab species. Now keep this in mind that one of the major nesting site of horseshoe crab in India is in Balasore, Odisha. And as we saw earlier during our discussion of WPA that horseshoe crabs falls under the Schedule 4 of WPA 1972. Where the killing and poaching of horseshoe crab is an legal offense in our country. Let's see that what is the reason for this species to be listed as vulnerable in IUCN and why there is a rising demand in America to list it under the endangered species category. Well, because there has been a rampant decline in the population of horseshoe crab where the population has been declined by 66% in the Delaware Bay estuary which used to host the largest population of the horseshoe crab, as well as the egg densities has been fallen by 80%. One of the major causes is because of the over-harvesting for food and bait of horseshoe crab which is leading to the decline in the genetic diversity. At the same time, one of the most important reason is because of the use of horseshoe crab in biomedical testing, where various pharmaceutical companies are reaping these crabs because of the presence of a microbial agent in their blue blood. This microbial agent is called as Limulus amebocyte lisate or LAL, which can detect the presence of bacteria in any organism. Now, this was also utilized even during the testing of the COVID-19 vaccine, where these pharmaceutical companies were testing that whether their vaccine has any microbial agent or it can lead to any disease. Because of which the blue blood of horseshoe crab, which is very expensive, has become a much sought after thing by these pharmaceutical companies, leading to the decline in their population. Also, there is habitat loss because of the development in the ocean front, the rampant increase in pollution, coastal erosion, at the same time the sea level rise which is taking place because of global warming. All this is leading to the decline of horseshoe crab, and maybe we are going to witness the loss of another species from our world. Thus, we need to protect our environment, which shall become sine qua non at least in the 21st century. Now, with this discussion, we have reached to the end of our today's session. I hope that it was informative for you. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end and test your knowledge. We will meet soon in a very interesting discussion very soon. Thank you.